All right, here's a question for you gents. You've got 800 quid, $800, 800 euros, whatever you want to call it. You want a PC that's still going to do 1440p gaming, and you still want it to look nice. Can we do it in 2025? I think so, but I don't know yet because I haven't tested it. So let's try. Now, if you want your PC to look nice, most of that is going to come from your case. That's why I'm using this Vida. It's called the Akira. It's probably the cheapest dual chamber case that I can get my hands on. I know you guys in the US, you've got this like DIY PC cube or something like that. I think it's all the same stuff. So let's crack it open and see what it's like. Tell you what though, guys, your mum was right. It's a good job I'm a big lad, isn't it? Go. Have some of that. Okay guys, here it is. So this is the Vida Akira case. Why did I buy this? Not because it's fantastic, but because it comes with 3 fans, which are ARGB. It's a dual chamber fish tank, and it was like 50 quid, probably even a bit less. We don't want to spend too much money on a case at this price point, because you want to save that money for the parts that are going to make more difference. Alright guys, so I've raided my shelf, and I've picked out a good whop of parts there. So at the price point we're looking for, which is more sort of entry level, if we're going to be using new parts, you definitely got to focus on min-maxing. So don't spend too much money on things that only make a marginal difference, like motherboards. You want to spend a decent wedge of your money, at least half, on the graphics card. So this is the AMD Radeon 9060 XT. We've gone for the 16GB version. There's an 8GB version. I wouldn't recommend that. I think this is going to hold its own better. If we're going to aim for that 1440p gaming, the 16GB is going to be better. If you know you're going to be staying on 1080p, then you can save the money and go for the 8GB version, but this 16 is going to hold its own for longer, in my opinion. In order to make this fit in £800, dollars, whatever, I've had to go for the lowest CPU that I could find, and that is the Ryzen 8400F. Guys, this is not a fantastic CPU, but we are budget limited here. I wanted more money to spend on the graphics card especially, and the other components to make this fit in budget. If you've got an extra 60, 70 pounds, you should be buying the Ryzen 7600 or 7600X, whichever is cheaper at the time. But in order to make it fit in the budget, we've gone for the 8400F. I don't think the CPU is quite so important at 1440p if we're going to be using this graphics card. But you know, nowadays, multiplayer games especially, you probably want something a bit faster than this, but let's see how we get on. So this build is like a bit of a bunch of misfits. Can they work together to get us some good gaming performance, or are we going to be let down by some of the choices we made? We're going to find out. Let's build it, and I'll see you after. So the first thing to do with any PC build is to install the M2 SSD. We're using the Crucial T500 1TB today, which is a nice PCIe 4 drive with DRAM on board. We're just going to secure that in the top slot here. Next up, we have our DDR5 RAM. This is Crucial Pro Overclocking DDR5 6000 CL36, and it's a 32GB total kit, which is what I'd recommend nowadays. The motherboard we're using is the B850M Pro A Wi-Fi by AsRock. It's kind of a lower end B850 motherboard. You could go with something cheaper like an A series, but I think with the B series you're going to have better longevity for your upgrades in the future. So you could easily chuck in a Ryzen 7 9800X3D into this board with no issues. We've already placed our Ryzen 5 8400F carefully in the socket, and now we're going to put a cooler in place. So you could easily use the free stock cooler that comes with it, it'll be just fine, but we did happen to have an RGB tower cooler laying around. It's the Thermalright Assassin X120 RGB. So we're just going to put that mounting hardware in place, chuck a little bit of thermal paste down, and we're going to mount the cooler on top. Of course, with anything with multiple sides, just tighten a little bit each side at a time rather than securely fastening the whole side down in one go. Then the fan just goes on, really easy. You just put the fan next to it and then you just put these metal clips and hook it over the cooler. So this Vida case is really nice, but one of the problems is it's nice to come with 3 ARGB fans, but 2 of them are the wrong way round. I get that it looks nicer, but the problem is they're all going to be set to exhaust in this position. So the 2 side fans here, we're going to flip those round and make them intake, which is the correct orientation for airflow. Power supply is going to go in the back here, and this is the Deepcool PF500. It's a really basic power supply, although among the basic ones I find this one to be quite high quality. There's no coil whine. I've never had a single one fail, and I've used at least a dozen of them. Sure, you could get something better, like a 750 watt bronze, and I would actually recommend that, but in order to make this fit within budget, I have taken a slight hit on the power supply, while still keeping it something that's not going to be like a nuclear bomb. Next, we're going to descend our motherboard into the case. You want to clear out any cables that are underneath it so that they don't get trapped. Now you'll see that I use an electronic screwdriver a lot. I would actually recommend that you use a manual screwdriver, particularly for these motherboard screws that can get stripped quite easily. Now we're slotting in the graphics card, just goes in the PCIe slot here, and then the power plug is a really simple 8-pin PCIe. It's old school, but it works. In terms of cable management, these dual chamber cases are easy, just a single cable tie, and then just chuck the back panel back on because there's bags of room for cable management in the back. And let's see the final result. The question was, could we build a somewhat budget PC that's still going to be capable of 1440p gaming? And the answer to that question is clearly yes. If we take a look at the performance that we're able to get in the games that we were playing, Warzone with FSR on 160 FPS at 1440p, which isn't bad at all considering we're using a cheap CPU. Did look a bit blurry, so when we turned it off we got down to 140 FPS, but still pretty good for 1440p. Apex Legends a fantastic 1440p experience, getting over 160 FPS quite consistently in that game, which is going to be plenty if you've got a 1440p 165 or 144Hz monitor. And then of course Fortnite being a much lighter game to run when we run that on the competitive settings, getting 230 FPS on average. Now that is pretty sweet, and that's going to make you perfectly competitive if you're very good at the game but don't have the money to spend on a very high-end machine. The temperatures were excellent, but I don't expect anything less, to be honest. It's a decently well ventilated case with cheap fans, but we've got a tower cooler in place and we've got a lower end graphics card, and these lower end graphics cards, they don't need a big cooler or anything fancy to keep them really chilled. And of course we're following my motif of law of the cheapest model. For any graphics chipset, get the cheapest available version. So let's say you want to get this 9060 XT, don't get some expensive version, get literally the cheapest one, because there's not going to be any difference in performance. You might make the argument that if you've got the highest end part in any lineup, then maybe it's worth it going for a better model, but in general the wisdom is get the cheapest one, save the money, spend it on stuff that's actually going to matter. Now for this Vida Akira case, I'm actually quite pleasantly surprised by it. It looks fairly decent. It holds everything that I need. There's plenty of room for further expansion. Yes, it's a micro ATX case, but that's all right. Micro ATX motherboards are cheaper on average anyway. I think for the price that I paid for it and the overall price of this build, I think actually I'm really happy with how this has turned out. But what changes would I make if I had a few extra quid or if I wanted to shuffle things around a little? Now, the first thing I would change is the CPU. So I would probably go for a Ryzen 7600. Main reason is that that has slightly more cache, so that when you're playing your CPU bound games, you probably get better performance with the 7600. But that said, this 8400F did do the job. It's going to be about £50 to £60, whatever more to get that CPU upgrade. But what you could do really is not get the tower cooler. That's going to save you about 20 quid already. Although the tower coolers look nice, they're probably not needed for those more lower end parts. I include it here because it helps the PC sell on my website, if I'm being completely transparent. But you would have absolutely the same performance if you just had the stock cooler, particularly on the 8400F. If I had a bit of extra cash, I would probably also get a different power supply. I'd get a slightly higher wattage, something like a 750 watt bronze would be fine, mainly because that's going to give you plenty of flexibility for future upgrades. When you are gaming on a budget, there are going to be compromises you make. So if you say to yourself, I want the best performance right now, then you could just not get this motherboard, get the bargain basement cheapest one. Then you'd probably have enough money for those other CPU upgrades and other things that, yes, right now are going to give you better performance, but it's not very forward thinking, because if you look to upgrade in the future, you're not going to have as good of an experience upgrading if you use a bargain basement motherboard. It's going to depend what's more valuable to you, performance right now or balancing that performance with keeping that upgrade potential in place for the future. You know, along those lines, you could have gone with a Ryzen AM4 system with something like a Ryzen 5 5600 and probably get quite comparable performance. But on that platform, you are absolutely going to be at a dead end. So when it comes time to upgrade, you are going to have to spend quite a lot more money on that upgrade. Whereas with this system here, even if you did use a bargain basement motherboard, at least you'd be on the latest generation, if you see what I mean. That's quite enough blabbering. It's time for you to blabber down in the comments. You can tell me, if you were going to design a PC for this budget, what would you do with new parts? Because would you do something differently? I'd be really interested to know. Obviously, if you use used parts, you're going to get a lot better value for money. But if you've got a better new spec, yeah, chuck it down below, and I'll catch you in the next upload.